Daily learning.
When enough becomes enough. People often glorify the pursuit of perfection, painting it as a noble and admirable path to take in life. Yet no one really talks about the silent burden it places on a person's shoulders, the heavy kind of burden that slowly builds up until you're no longer sure if you're running toward success or simply away from failure. In my case, the desire to be perfect did not erupt suddenly, as if some dramatic lightning bolt had struck me with ambition, but instead, it crept into my mind gradually, almost gently, until it rooted itself so deeply in how I measured my worth that I could no longer tell the difference between striving to be my best and exhausting myself just to be enough in the eyes of others. Over time, I noticed that this hunger for perfection was not always mine to begin with. It was stitched together from every praise I had ever received for being the dependable one, the mature one, the one who always had her life together. I grew up clinging to those compliments, thinking they were signs I was moving in the right direction, using them as proof that I mattered. Yet the truth, one I refused to admit for a long time, was that every time someone called me strong or capable, I only felt more pressure to live up to their expectations. And somewhere along the line, I started to believe that the real me, the one who sometimes didn't know what to do, the one who felt things deeply and needed rest, wasn't enough. As a result, my daily life became centered on the idea that making mistakes was not an option, and failure felt like a threat rather than a stepping stone. I developed a habit of second-guessing everything I did, whether it was the way I responded to a friend or the tone of a message I sent, and I spent countless hours editing words, actions, and even emotions before presenting them to the world. I avoided situations that made me uncomfortable because I feared not being able to control the outcome, and I pushed myself through days when I should have rested simply because I believed rest was a reward I hadn't earned yet. Slowly, the effort to appear flawless began to drain every part of me, and even though I looked calm on the outside, my inner world was filled with noise, with guilt, and with the sinking feeling that I was losing touch with who I really was. Eventually, this internal pressure began to take a visible toll on me, and though I tried to hide it, the exhaustion became too much to keep out of sight. I found myself overreacting to minor issues, feeling anxious about things that hadn't even happened, and withdrawing from people who loved me because I didn't want them to witness how overwhelmed and insecure I truly was. I believed that if I worked just a little harder, if I fixed all my flaws, I would finally reach that elusive feeling of being enough. But the more I tried to control everything, the more I began to feel like I was running in circles, chasing approval I could never quite hold on to. The frustration turned inward, and I began to question why I couldn't be more like the people who seemed effortlessly content, the ones who made mistakes and shrugged them off, the ones who didn't crumble under the weight of expectations. I resented myself for being so caught up in the fear of disappointing others, for constantly striving and still feeling unsatisfied. Even moments that should have been joyful were clouded by an internal checklist of what I could have done better. My mind had become a relentless critic, and I felt as though I was living inside a cage built out of my own fear of being seen as anything less than perfect. Yet amid the chaos, there came a moment that felt almost too quiet to matter, but it stayed with me. One rainy afternoon, I sat by the window with no distractions and no tasks pulling me in 100 directions. The world outside was gray and still, and for the first time in what felt like years, I let myself simply be. There was no performance, no mask, no voice telling me to do more. Just me, tired and breathing, yet still here. And in that stillness, I saw how far I had drifted from myself. I couldn't even remember the last time I had done something just because it made me happy, not because it made me appear capable or impressive. This quiet realization was the beginning of a slow unraveling. I began asking questions I had never allowed myself to consider. What if I stopped trying to be what everyone expected and started figuring out who I truly was underneath it all? What if my value wasn't something I had to chase or prove, but something that had always been there, waiting for me to recognize it? The process of answering those questions was not easy, and there were many days when I felt more lost than before, but something within me had shifted. I no longer wanted to live a life built on the approval of others. I wanted to build a life that felt like mine. Gradually, I began noticing beauty in places I had previously overlooked. I found comfort in conversations that didn't go perfectly, in the laughter that came from vulnerability rather than control, in the strength it took to show up when I didn't feel entirely ready. I learned that it was okay to admit I was struggling, and that doing so didn't make me weak, but human. I began to accept that the people who truly cared for me didn't need me to be flawless. They just needed me to be real. At the same time, I gave myself permission to rest, to step back from the constant striving, and to allow myself moments of joy that weren't earned through effort, but simply existed because I was alive. I stopped defining my worth by how many things I checked off a to-do list or how well I performed, and instead, I started asking myself whether I was present, whether I was kind to myself, and whether I was living in alignment with what I believed mattered. I began journaling with honesty instead of perfection, letting my thoughts spill onto the page without judgment. I let myself cry without shame and laugh without needing it to look graceful. Over time, I came to understand something deeply transformative. Perfection is not only unattainable, but also unnecessary. It is a standard that constantly shifts, always asking for more, never satisfied with what is. It robs us of the joy found in process, the connection found in imperfection, and the peace found in simply being enough as we are. Once I let go of the belief that I had to earn love through performance, I found a kind of freedom that felt both unfamiliar and utterly beautiful. So, I chose to walk away from the chase. I chose to embrace the reality that my strength lies not in being flawless, but in being whole, in showing up fully, with my fears and flaws, with my softness and uncertainty. I chose to believe that I am allowed to be a work in progress, and that growth doesn't require shame, but compassion. I learned to extend grace to myself when I fall short and to celebrate progress that can't always be measured. Now, I live more slowly, more intentionally. I set boundaries where I need them, even if that means disappointing others. I speak my truth, even when my voice is uncertain. I create for the sake of expression, not validation. I allowed myself to be seen, not as a polished version of who I think I should be, but as someone who is constantly unfolding, learning, and growing. And most importantly, I remind myself daily that it is enough to simply be who I am in this moment. In the end, I stopped chasing perfection not because I lost the will to succeed, but because I finally understood what it had cost me. It had taken my peace, my joy, my connection to self, and I was no longer willing to give those things away. What I have now is not a life free from struggle or doubt, but a life rooted in authenticity, in gentleness, and in the quiet courage it takes to be myself. And that, I have come to believe, is more valuable than anything perfection ever promised. And perhaps the most beautiful part of this journey is not that I have it all figured out, but that I've learned how to stay with myself through the questions, through the moments of doubt, through the quiet victories that no one else may see. I no longer chase a finish line that keeps moving. I plant my feet where I am, I breathe, and I remind myself that being present is enough. Every scar, every misstep, every trembling attempt to begin again has shaped me into someone I'm learning to be proud of. Not because she is perfect, but because she is real. The one who's soft in her strength, gentle in her healing, and brave enough to choose herself, day after day. If there is one truth I hold on to now, it is this. I was never meant to be flawless, and I was meant to be free. How about you?